too, don't forget, you are going to have a quiz on this, and I didn't see anybody like taking notes or anything the other day, so you might want to just know that you are responsible for what is presented. So
this project we worked on was Phyllis Wheatley. My name is John Stubbs, and
I'm Mariah.
And this song that's playing now, it's called Hush. Somebody's calling my name. That's a Negro spiritual that was sung in that era, as well as that's our choir here at school singing. So thought it would be fitting. On the biography of Phyllis Wheatley, she was born in Senegal in about 1753, captured and sold by John Wheatley, educated by the Wheatley family. If you all notice, Wheatley was her last name. That slaves were typically given the last name of their slave masters. She was educated, which is also something that we found weird because slaves were not educated by the master. They thought that if a slave was educated, then they were considered to be useless because they know how to read and write, and it's kind of like ignorance is bliss. So that's how. Newly acquired slaves were stripped completely down and put open for examination by potential buyers. Inquiring buyers checked all of the slaves to see if they were physically healthy and if check their teeth, just like in the movie Uncle Tom's Cabin. Phyllis Wheatley was bought by a God-fearing man with the last name Wheatley.
Since the slaves were stripped of everything they owned, even their names, Phyllis came to this country without identity. Since she was carried from Africa on a slave ship called Phyllis, that's what they named her, and of course, they gave her her last name, which is Wheatley. One of her poems actually caught the attention of George Washington. She actually got to meet him, and he actually gave her credit and put her name out there. She was actually a little popular before she met George Washington, and these are some of her poems, just a few of them.
When we analyze on being brought from Africa to America, the reader must first recognize the time period in which the poem was written and the situation of the writer. Wheatley, who was also an African-American slave, was one of the best-known poets in the pre-19th century America. Phyllis Wheatley was seized from Senegal, Gambia.
She was transported to the docks of Boston with a shipment of refugee slaves that were unfit for work in the South and the West Indies. Typically, slaves would be brought from Africa, and their first thought would be somewhere in the West Indies to be seasoned. For the women, that meant being beaten, sometimes raped, just depending on how reluctant and resistant they were. And then they would be sent to America. Phyllis, actually, around this time, Phyllis's time in history was more towards the colonial times. So they weren't as harsh, and a lot of the horrific stories that we've heard about slaves in the South weren't really coming to be at that time. That wasn't until later, until more laws were passed and people got used to the institution of slavery. Because at first, they were treated more like indentured servants. They would work for X amount of years and would actually be able to live as free people, have their own house, go where they wish. But like I said, Phyllis was a slave. She actually lived a life very different than other slaves in the sense that she was educated, and there isn't any records of her being beaten or misused.
The slaves wore torn and raggedy clothing and were forced to do back-breaking labor under extreme conditions. The slaves had only a few things that they did for fun, which were singing, dancing, and the telling of stories. Which the singing is how we get the Negro spirituals, which they tell a story. For instance, the song that was just playing is called "Hush, Somebody's Calling My Name," and the story behind that song is you couldn't tell the people around you to hush, because the slave master would want to know, well, why are you telling everybody to hush? They sung that song to let them know that they need to be quiet because the Underground Railroad was traveling through, and if you wanted to escape, you need to listen out for it to get on that passage on the way out. Oppression is something. We got another video that we're gonna interject in here, and then we're gonna come back to this. It's kind of oppression is something that still exists today, but in different forms. For example, inequality on loans. I know that's a bit of a stretch, but it is, still out there, as well as sex trafficking. Have any of you all heard of that? That still exists today, and that's another form of slavery. And we'll let you watch the video, and then we'll come back and go into this.
The video's self-explanatory.